arrived at the halacha in it says here in the Rambam concerning the new grain crop, and basically there's two rules regarding the grain crop. There's the no reaping the new grain crop, no using it as a korban, and no eating it. The issues regarding eating, the Rambam brings elsewhere. He brought this in Ma'achalos Asuros. We were in Tvidim Musafim. Now the Rambam brings the mitzvah to count the Spiras Omer. We saw some of these commandments. I pointed out. Let's read them actually inside the Rambam's view of Spiras Omer. Halachas. It's Tvidim Musafim, 7th Perek, halacha 19 or 22, according to which count. It's on page. The way we're looking at this. Hold on one second. It's on the same document. It's earlier in the document. So on the page that begins with Hey, it says Tavua. Tavua Sheishrisha to Omer, Achar Omer. So we're at the halacha. It says Yutet Kaf Bet. Zayin Yutet Kaf Bet. Mitzvah se lispor Sheva Shabbatot Timot. It is a commandment of the Torah, positive commandment of the Torah, to count 7 complete weeks. Miyom Hava'ata Omer, from the day of the bringing of the Omer. Shnemar uspartem lachem imacharat Shabbat. You shall count for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, which we hold the Sabbath is Yontif. Start counting 7 weeks. Umitzvah limnot hayamim ima shavuot, and the commandment is to count the days along with the weeks, which means, like we said last time, it must be that there's something here about holding on to the weeks, because whenever anybody's counting some sort of purification, it's usually 7 days. So count 7 days and then count another 7 days and keep track of how many times you did this. Shnemar tisperu chamishim yom. Twice it says count 7 weeks, and once it says count 50 days. And if you think about that for a minute, by the way, that contradicts, because I did some math. Turns out 7 weeks come out to how many days? 49. So I understand I'm supposed to count weeks. I understand I'm supposed to count days, but why don't I ever count day 50? Because it's not part of a week. It is part of biblical idiom that normally, let's say, how many malachas is 39, 40 minus 1. Or malchut arba'im is how much? 39. Lash him 40 times means lash him 39 times. And the 69 descendants of Jacob comes out to 70. So too, it is biblical idiom that when I've counted something, it's actually just 49. You could say it's 50. If you get away with that, that is totally fine. And we count from the beginning of the day. Therefore, count at night from the night of the 16th of Nisan. And as I told you before, the Torah and others assume that sometimes you're supposed to count right at the Shkia, as we saw in the Mishnah. You're supposed to count when you start the reaping, and the reaping starts at the sundown. And the Shulchan Aruch points this out. The Beis Yosef did it actually. Some people are machmir; they wait until 6 days at least. But Ikra Din, it's from sundown. And by the way, this is I guess one of my pet peeves. The Shulchan Aruch himself holds that it's important to start every Shabbos and Yontif early, Josephus Shabbos, which means you're supposed to take in the Shabbos early. The Shulchan Aruch's definition of taking in Shabbos early is what? Davening Mariv. And the Shulchan Aruch, like the Gemara before him, equates davening Mariv, making Kiddush, and eating. If you took in Shabbos, you daven Mariv, say Kiddush, you can eat, and the sun is still shining. That is an obligation every single Shabbos and Yontif. Nafkamina is, in the 1600s, we have this Havamina that, for some reason, Shavuos, one shouldn't say Kiddush at least until nightfall of night 50. Otherwise, it somehow affects the previous count. And we never saw something like that beforehand. There was the way you do Tamimis is by counting a complete 49 days. You count each day at the beginning. But the fact that you count the next day a little bit early, that's not going to affect the previous day. So why should the start of the 50th affect it? By the way, the source material says Kiddush, but it doesn't say Mariv. In the Mishnah Berurah, it's changed to even Mariv. But then again, what's the nafkamina between Kiddush and Mariv? Both are functions of taking in the Yontif early. My point is that, Friday night, but Shavuos is Thursday. Yeah. Really? Why? Why? No early Shabbos, but everybody's going to take in Shabbos early. Yeah. On Friday? Really, it's kind of weird. Okay, but the hakpada of the shla in the Magen Avraham is to start Shavuos late, no early Shavuos. The problem, yes. So, but I'm talking about just starting Shavuos from a weekday. This idea that we have to take in Shavuos no early means wait until nightfall to have Marav and I have Shavuos and Kiddush and everything. That's an idea that postdates the Shulchan Aruch by a century, and it also does not agree with the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch would tell you you have an obligation every Shabbos and Yontif to start Shabbos early if you can, Shabbos or Yontif early, and the definition thereof is davening, and which allows Kiddush and eating. Even Leil Pesach, technically speaking. Because even Leil Pesach, technically speaking, I'm trying to also point this out. I've been arguing. I showed one rabbi says, yeah, well, this is a good kula for people sick. I said, no, it's Ikar Din because the Shulchan Aruch says Techshach, and that's what the Mishnah says. Techshach, you should start your Seder. It's an explicit pasuk in the Torah regarding matzah. The matzah, there's Tosefes mitzvah for matzah, whatever, this is the topic of the shir. And it says about eating Korban Pesach, that starts at Shkia, not at Seis. So why should Pesach be any different? The Tosafos had this idea that no, Pesach should be different, but the Rambam and the Rif and other Tosafists never said such a thing. So technically speaking, you're taking Pesach early. My question is, when do you start doing your commandments? But even the Trumas Adeshen only said, what? You can't get to the eating of the matzah, but you can start your Seder. It's a real jump to say, you know what? Even Kiddush, you have to wait until a certain time. That's a real Kiddush. I don't know. Like I said, I'm fighting a windmill here. Just trying to show them the evidence. Well, I don't know why. It's yeah, that's a little bit too early. Yeah. Oh boy, it's a real chumrah to say the Arba Kosos have to be after Tzeis. It's a major chumrah to say even in Shkia. From what we see, the only thing in the Rishonim that they were discussing was maybe eating Korban Pesach and Matzah. The two mitzvahs d'oraisa have to be after sundown, after Tzeis. That was the Havamina. There's psukim to show that both are at Shkia, and maybe even earlier than Shkia. But to say that the Kiddush has to be, that's the Arba Kosos. I don't know why. We just like Chumrah, It's safe, like the Mishnah Shulchan Aruch says. Anytime you have a mitzvah to do at night, just wait until the stars come out. Play it safe. But that's not what the way the sages had it. The sages said they were very specific. What mitzvah is done when? And there's only specific things. Okay, whatever. If anybody wants to see, I'd be happy to show them. I've compiled these for anybody to see. Just like you're supposed to wear a talis every davening, it's very clear. It's just Shulchan Aruch and basic sources. You don't have to rely on strange manuscripts. You just have to rely on Pshat and the Gemara, the Rashi, and the way the Rambam and the Rishonim have it. And you can see the truth is there for those who want to see it. Well, this Shabbos you may do so. There's the Shulchan Aruch certainly holds that this Shabbos, even though Friday is Yontiv, there's a mitzvah to take in Shabbos early. The same as every week, and the same as every Yontiv, every single year. That's the Shulchan Aruch's opinion. Well, the Ramah, he doesn't necessarily disagree with this. When I say Shulchan Aruch, I mean as opposed to Rambam and Vilna Gaon, who say Tosefes, Shabbos, and Yontif is only an obligation on Yom Kippur, but all the other Shabbos and Yontifs, it's just a mitzvah, an optional mitzvah. So you may take in Shabbos early. But to say you cannot take in Shabbos early this week, that's wow. You'd have to. I am unaware of the major Rishonim who say this. It's not the Shulchan Aruch's discussion even. So, and like I said, I would extend this to this coming Yom Tov, which starts Thursday night. Rabbi Bar-Hayim has pointed this out. Really, according to the old minhag and the old din, before there was any havamina that one has to wait for a certain point to take in Shavuos, it's a mitzvah to take in Shavuos early, like any other Shabbos and Yontif. And there's no mitzvah d'oraisa that we were waiting to perform. You could say, at least on Passover, you have mitzvahs to accomplish. Eat the matzah, eat the maror, eat the korban pesach. So wait until it's nighttime. Shavuos, there is no mitzvah to do at night. There's no mitzvah of the night of Shavuos. And if you want, and if you say, "Oh, staying up all night," okay, so you're already staying up. You're already accomplishing that. Okay, so yeah, that's it's good to help people. Like I said, we wish we could argue these things more and present the evidence there too. You first have to be willing to see the source. It continues, "Shachach v'lo mana b'layla moneh bayom." If he forgot to count at night, count the Omer, he should count by day. There's a tshuva of the Rambam which says that if he's counting by day, he doesn't say the bracha there on. But if he missed the day completely in the count, he maybe can still say the bracha. Yeah, we know that already. If a person broke his count completely, there's no more bracha to be said. That's the compromise opinion. But you could even say within the Rambam that there's not. The Rambam himself addressed this issue and says you don't make the bracha by day, but it doesn't affect the count, and he continues saying it. And yes, that's basically what we do. Ve'ein modin ela me'omed, ve'ein mana mi'oshev yatsa. This is important. The Rambam actually says you should be standing when you say this bracha. Why? Because it says me'achel chermesh ba'kama. When you set the sickle to the kama, that's the standing grain. Kama from the word standing. So you should be standing when you're counting the Omer. Mashma, the fact that the Rambam, by the way, has to say that certain commandments can only be performed after the stars come out is already and he says that in 3 places, implying that the other commandments at night don't have to wait for such a threshold. Like I said, there's biblical sources for all these things, and we could go through them maybe some other time. Mitzvah zo al kol ish miYisrael. This commandment to count the Omer is upon everybody, every Jew. Uvchol makom v'chol zman, at all times and places. This is against those Rishonim where we suggested, based on the Gemara, that Sfiras Omer is only a biblical commandment when the Omer is brought. And when there's no Omer, there's no mitzvah d'oraisa to count the Omer. Instead, our count is a rabbinic enactment. Who says such a thing? There are Rishonim who say that. There is actually a Bar-Hayim who said such a thing. That's the Gemara in Menachos, where he said, I only have to count the days, Zecher L'Mikdashu. It's only Zecher L'Mikdash. And as you said, because do the rest of the sages say that they agree with his premise that it's just a Zecher L'Mikdash, but you should still count the weeks, or they disagreed with his premise and his conclusion. They didn't even hold of this whole idea that Zecher L'Mikdash, it's still there. So the Rambam is unequivocal. This is a mitzvah d'oraisa in all times and places, and it's not contingent on the temple standard. And what? Yes. Kabbalists, Lurianic Kabbalists. I don't know who specifically did, but it's in the Sfarim already, so they had to consider. All the Yeshem Yichud, Kucha Brichu, Zing, Lutum, Zuma, Ushpizin, these are all things you cannot find in the early literature. You're not going to find a Talmudic source for them. I was getting into an argument with someone yesterday. Staying up all night Shavuos, and also when you could finally cut your hair, before Lag BaOmer, after Lag BaOmer, and all that, you're not going to find Talmudic source for such a thing because non-Talmudic. You use a black chicken, a red chicken, or a white chicken for the final. Okay? These are discussions in the Mishnah Berurah, but these are not that which we could find a Talmudic source. And it's not saying that you can open up a Mishnah Torah about this. It's not subject to Talmudic study. Yeah. No, the fact that people could do it, no. The popularity, it was able to catch on because of coffee. He's not the first one to say such a thing. It seems to be indicated that way. When the Beis Yosef did this, we know that the Beis Yosef himself practiced this, and he practiced it with fairly a minimum. And Rabbi Shlomo Alphabet writes about the Beis Yosef's practice. The Beis Yosef did this himself, but did not write that there's such a minhag, did not encourage everybody to do so. And when he did it, he was alone, basically. And coffee allows us, thank God. You've seen this yourself. Imagine everybody here stay up all night. And they try. So do you think it would be possible without coffee for many people? Well, okay. Well, I don't know. I say yeah. When does that come into play? That's when you have in the Talmud 2 ways to go, and the Talmud has no way to decide between those 2 opinions. But when it comes to just what do? Just follow the masses. That's not really a thinking man's option. I myself, I find it incredible. I would not want to stay up all night. I find depriving myself of sleep, I would rather fast 5 fast days, no food and water, than go a night without sleep. Okay. And sometimes you have to do it. I was traveling. I said when I went to California, I went the whole 25 hours and more. Really came out to about 30 hours of no sleep. Okay. I did it all. Okay, so I could do that. And then I had to travel later that week back to Israel. I saw on the plane, the flight took off well after midnight. And finally, this poor guy, I saw him, he had his wife and kids with him on the plane. Finally, it's quiet, the plane, and he looked like he dozed off. And then suddenly this big Hasidic guy came over to him and woke him up. Chakras! He didn't ask for it. And I saw the look on this guy's face. Oh man, what Hasiduch stoots. He woke the poor guy up. He fell asleep after this long whatever. Yeah. So I think sleep deprivation is much worse, but you could do whatever you want. I've seen this is a good thing. Rabbi Gordon in Gush was talking about how he's actually heartened to see reform and conservative types fighting over the kotel. They want a piece of the kotel also. Remember, their whole shtick in the olden days was reform didn't hold of Jerusalem, Eretz Yisrael. This is our Berlin, yeah. Now they want, now the kotel is also ours, so that's a good thing. One day you're going to see them fighting also for the Yeshuvim, for Yeshuv Eretz Yisrael. We also want to share in expanding the Jewish Yeshuv in Eretz Yisrael. That's a good thing. So I saw they have up the block, Hebrew Union, whatever. There's a place that's a little bit reconstructionist or something like that. Yeah. What's their brand? Their reform. So you know what they had? They had Tikkun Leil Shavuot happening. So look, I'm all for if Balabatim and others are going to finally just spend some time Torah studying. So let them, and that's what gets them to come in. So do Shavuos, do Shoshana Rabbah, do a few days on Pesach also. I'm all for it. And if it gets the reform to open up a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, which maybe they change the text, but if they go back to the way it is, this is a real kiruv thing. So let them do that too. God bless them. I'd rather see them do more of the right thing than more of the wrong thing. So it's a good thing. And just living in Eretz Yisrael will bring them back, and we should merit to see all these groups. Like the Rambam says, it's basically the Sadducees, the Karaites, reformers. They just don't. They want to interpret the Torah their own way, so they leave the words of the sages. But there is room for them to come back. The Karaites are still Jews, in a strange way, but they're still Jews. They're not. Let's say Samaritans were not Jewish. Okay. Let's continue. Nashim avadim p'turim misprata Omer, and women and slaves are exempt from Sfiras Omer. Guess why? It's a time-bound commandment. It's tzarich levarech b'chol laila. One is to say the bracha every night. Why every night? The Havamina was just to say the bracha the first night, and that covers every night when he counts. What does he say? Asher kiddusham b'mitzvotah v'sivanu al svirata Omer kodem sheyispor. He should say this bracha before he counts. Manav lo beirach yatzaf. He said that if he counted without saying the blessing, like all the other cases, if a person performs any command without reciting the blessing thereof, he's discharged his obligation. And then he doesn't say another blessing or say blessing post counting because he already performed the commandment. Let's go into the 8th parak. The 8th parak is going to talk about, so what happens on Shavuos? The mitzvah of Shavuos is not, the Rambam, you'd be surprised if we told him we stay up all night. By the way, what's the Rambam's response to staying up all night? Any night is, that's not healthy, it's not smart. You're supposed to try to get in 8 hours of sleep at night and don't sleep during the day and do everything, be normal. Don't overeat, don't eat too little, don't eat too much, don't take on a fast day when you don't have to, don't dehydrate yourself. Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. So the Rambam's definitely against this whole staying up all night business. Says if you want to, by the way, how do you do, what are you supposed to do on Shavuos? Chetzil Hashem, Chetzil Lachem. You have to put in 6 hours in base medrash or davening, at least, or so. But this year, what is it, Shavuos, how many daylight hours are going to be on Thursday? More than 13. So you got to put in like 6.5 hours in shul. Mincha and Marav count toward that time, but you have to make up that time in the base medrash. And if you don't, so you're not discharging your obligation according to the Rambam. On the 50th day of the Sfiras Omer, Hu Chag Shavuot, V'hu Yom Aseret. Notice it's the 50th day of Shavuot. The Rambam doesn't say the 6th of Sivan. Because, like we said, if you're actually at a calendar, perhaps, even though they would make sure to keep Nisan full and ER short, could be that both would be short, or both would be full, in which case the Shavuot would be on the 5th or the 7th. So that's the definition of Shavuot. It's also called Atzeret. Why does Rambam say that? It's also called Atzeret because that's what the sages of the Mishnah call this day. But the Torah doesn't call it that. What day is called Atzeret in the Torah? The 8th day of Sukkot. Yeah. So it's kind of funny that the sages chose this word to describe Shavuot. Okay. On this day, just like all the days of Passover, there's a musaf, which is just like the musaf of Rosh Chodesh, which is Shnei Parim, V'ayel, V'shiv'ach, Vasim, Ulam Olod. 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs, all as a burnt offering, with Sa'ir Hataf, and a he-goat as a sin offering. The exact same thing offered all the days of Passover and every single Rosh Chodesh. Ve'elu ena korbanot amarot bechumash hapkudim. Those are the korbanot that are described in the Book of Numbers, which is, by the way, saying in English, Book of Numbers is closer to the name that the sages recognize than calling it Chumash Bamidbar, right? Rambam recognized a parsha called Bamidbar, but not a book called that. You still use the sage's name. Ve'hein Musaf Hayom. And this is the Musaf of the day. He has to say that that's what we read in Parshas Pinchas. Ve'od, and further, Mivi'in Yater al Musaf Hayom Hazeh, Mincha Chadasha, Shtei Halechem. On this day also, we bring what's called a new mincha. New mincha, every year they bring it. No, it's Shtei Halechem because it's brought from the new wheat crop. The Omer is brought from the new barley crop. And this is basically the inaugural korban of this year that's brought from the wheat. And we're going to see it. They weren't bringing wheat from the new crop until this point. Not necessarily. Umakrivim al im halechem. And along with these 2 loaves of bread, we also bring, as a korban, par, ushne elim, v'shivach vasim, a bull and 2 rams and 7 lambs, hakol olod. How's that different from the musaf? The musaf is 2 bulls, 1 ram, 7 lambs, and this is 1 bull, 2 rams, 7 lambs. So it almost looks the same. It could have been also, this Rabbi Soloveitchik would point out, the Bible critics see this thing in Parshas Vayikra, in Parshas Emor, and they say that what's described here is basically a different version of the musaf. The number of lambs remains the same, 7 lambs. The question is it 1 bull and 2 rams, or is it 2 bulls and 1 ram? And there are some who say, that's basically what it is. The Bible was actually compiled early Second Temple times by multiple authors who did not agree with each other, and that the final redactor himself didn't proofread what he wrote, and he left in these discrepancies, and that's what we have in front of us. Right? Makes sense. But the problem is the verses don't allow that, because the verses seem to say also, if you read them, sometimes it says on these holidays, Vikraftem mincha, it says, or Vikraftem olah, something or other, it's implying that this is besides the musaf. This is what it says in Chumash Vayikra. With the Shtei Halechem, there's a whole slew of korbanot which almost looks like that which is in Parshas Pinchas, but it's not the same. It differs with this number. So if we had time for this, if we had a Chumash class, I'd explain to you why this has to be the way the Rambam says. Just like, how do we know that it says in that Parsha that Shabbat is a reference to Yom Tov and not ain't going to work on Saturday? That you could see. There's a few cases where that's the case. You know that the Karaites and the Sadducees also said that what? The day starts when? The halachic day starts with what? Sunrise. Their Shabbos starts at sunrise, and the night follows the day. But we know that there's verses that deny that. It says Me'erev. That's talking about Pesach comes in at the Erev, and Yom Kippur starts at the Erev. There's a few others that they overlooked. And we say that the year actually starts when? We say the year starts in Tishrei, the fall. That's beginning of the rainy season. That's implied in the book of Devarim and some other places. But they would say that just like Nisan is the first month, that's the beginning of the year, and that's how they count their years. Until today, that's what they do. The problem is they're not being medayik enough. They read it literally, and they deny the tradition of the sages, but they're not reading it close enough to understand this, and you could see that in there. So this would be a time. This would be a shir for some other time. The third halacha: Nimtza hakarev yom zeh yater al shnei atmidim. Therefore, it turns out that the korbanot of today, this Shavuot holiday, aside from the 2 tmidim, that's a lamb in the morning and lamb in the afternoon, shlosha parim, ushlosha elim, v'arba'a sark vasim. It's 3 bulls, 3 lambs, and 3 rams, and 14 lambs. Hakol esrim behema olod, a total of 20 animals as burnt offerings. Ushne Seirim, and 2 he-goats, Chataoth Nechalim, which are sin offerings which the Kohanim end up eating. Sometimes you have a chataf that they don't end up eating, but these ones are supposed to be eaten by the Kohanim. Ushne Chvasim, Shlamim Nechalim, and these other 2 lambs that are brought with the Shtei Lechem that are meant to be eaten. They're not burnt offerings, they're Shlamim. And they're, the Ram was going to point out, the only Shlamim that are brought by the Tzibur. Normally Shlamim, the type of korban that's eaten, is brought by individuals. And in this case, this is brought on behalf of the Tzibur, and who eats it? The Kohanim, apparently. These 2 loaves of bread are only brought from produce from the land of Israel, and also from the new crop. Don't take grain from somewhere else. Well, if it's Shemitah, answer, the Beis Din doesn't observe Shemitah. They take from the new crop. As it says, Mimo Shevo Techem Taviu Lechem Tenufa. From your dwelling places, bring this bread of waving, or the heaving. And in this case also, those are Bali Kriya. What's special about this aleph over here and the word Taviu? You guys seen? The Bali Kriya will tell you there's a dagesh in the aleph. What does a dagesh in the aleph mean? Normally means you geminate the aleph, you say the aleph twice, like any other letter, and after it's Nuag Adolah, it doesn't make much sense. Shot is, don't swallow the aleph. Don't say Taviyu. Don't say it like Taviyu. Say Taviu. You have to pause between the E and the U. Okay. Lo matzu chadash yaviu min ha'aliyah. If they don't have from the new grain crop, so they should bring from the aliyah. What's the aliyah in this case? The attic. That's where they keep the old grain crop. Chitim sheyardu be'avim. What does it say here? Rashi explains this one. Chitim that came down from the clouds. Really, it rains grain sometimes. What does that mean? So Rashi explains, sometimes you have a storm, and the storm picks up something over here and deposits it over there. It could happen. Crazier things have happened, right? Not literally cats and dogs, but I think even then, like there was a case where some things were lifted up by the whirlwind. Well, how do things lift it up? Because the same, I guess the geospheric forces, when heat rises, it also goes up circularly, right? It creates a tornado-like effect. It rises. Yeah, but any heat rises, you actually see this. If there's a lot of dust in the air, you can see little tornadoes in certain places where it's hot. There's certain birds that know to hitch a ride on these updrafts that it goes circularly. Okay, fine. And that could lift up things. It could lift up a bird. It could lift up even the small particles. And then it deposits them somewhere else. Well, oh, okay, fine. Okay. So the question was, does this count Moshe Votechem or not? So don't use those. How often did this happen? I don't know. If he had such wheat that was picked up by the storm, so he could, if he brought it, it's kosher. How would this work? They would bring 3 se'ah, just like the first korban, 3 se'ah of this new wheat. We rub them to remove the husk, and we also kick them. It means that shifa apparently is with the hands. Bita is an act they do with their feet. Kederach kol menachot, like they do to all the menachot. It never has to be nice and fine and white. They want to get those kernels out there. B'tochanino tan soleth, and they grind them into soleth. Umanapin mehen shnei esronot b'shteim esrei nafa. They sift it into shnei esronot total using 12 sieves. V'ashar nifdeh. The remaining stuff they could actually redeem. That is, they could sell it to someone. You could go to the Beis Hamikdash and buy this, and it's actually considered chulin at that point. He paid for it. It's now not Beis Hamikdash property. And if he makes a large enough quantity of it into a dough, he'd have to give some to the Kohen. But he does not have to take a tithe out of this. Why? Because tithing is only done on crops that had a Jewish owner. That which was hefker doesn't need to be tithed, and that which belongs to the Beis Din or the hektish does not need to be tithed. So this actually is something that people have to understand. I encountered this a few times. Someone, let's say, has a lemon tree or a shesek tree. How do you say shesek in English? Whatever it is. What? Loquats? Oh, shesek sounds more appetizing. Okay, fine. So let's say you have your neighbor. I just picked lemons. So lemons need to be tithed, at least midrabanan. So you have to take out some for the Kohen and some Truma Meiser Sheni, Trumas Meiser. Otherwise, those lemons are not kosher. Let's say the neighbor said, you know what, you come in and take all the lemons you want. It's not Shemitah. You still have to tithe those. That's not Hefker. Hefker doesn't mean he let everybody come and take the food. Hefker means he renounced ownership of the property and of the tree. Okay, so there was someone had to understand this. If you find a lemon tree mamish in the middle of nowhere, or grain in the middle of nowhere, so you do not have to tithe those crops because those are actual Hefker. They don't belong to anybody. But when your neighbor allows you to come into the field and take some of his grain or take some of his fruit, that's not an act of Hefker. He's just letting you have some. He's sharing ownership with you, but you still have to tithe that. Wait a minute. So how come Shemitah we say it's Hefker and I don't have to tithe that, which when I went to his yard in Shemitah, I take it? The answer is the Torah made it Hefker. The Torah made his fruit tree today. It's Shemitah year. Today it's Hefker. It will go back to him afterwards. And it's his commandment to allow everybody in and not lock it up. So the Torah lit it. That's different. During Shemitah, it's different rules. It actually is considered Hefker. But it's not like he gave up ownership of this property, and when Shemitah's over, now someone could kick him off if he claims it. So it's very important. Don't forget to tithe your fruits. So that's what they did with this, and we'll continue next halacha. Halacha vav or dalid, depending which version you have. We have both. So shtei alechem shehem min hachadash. These 2 loaves of bread that come from the new crop. Tzrichim lavo isaron mikol sa'al mechza. You have to get an isaron worth, not a lot of flour, from every 1.5 se'ah. So we start off with 3 se'ah. So these 3 se'ah will give us 2 isronot. Umnapinotan b'shtem esrei nafa. And we sift them with these 12 sieves. V'lechem haponim, the showbread. That's every week. Shehu bamin an yashan, which we usually use from the older grain crop. Dayo lo v'achad esrei nafa. It's sufficient to sift it 11 times, 11 sieves. V'hu ba isaron mikol sa'ah. And there we get an isaron out of every sa'ah, which means it's not as fine. It's not sifted, so there's less waste. Aval Omer shehu ba misorim chadashot. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can clear this up. The Omer that was brought on Passover, so that came from new barley. Eino ba min hamukar ela mishalosh si'in uv'shlosh esrei nafa. It only comes from the choicest barley, and also from 3 se'in, which is a large quantity, uv'shlosh esrei nafa, and 3 sieves. So, uv'shlosh esrei nafa, 13 sieves. So the Omer is 13 sieves. The shtei lechem is 12 sieves, and lechem aponim is 11. I guess the more sieves, the more you're going to take out, the finer the flour. Let's say you didn't do this exact thing. Put in more se'in or less se'in, it's still kosher. We didn't see in the Torah, by the way, the Torah doesn't tell us that these lechem aponim should come from more grain and be sifted a certain amount of times, and the Omer more, and the shtei lechem less. Those are all customs they had in the temple. I think it's analogous to the value of the high priest's vestments. On Yom Kippur, it says he would wear fine white linen vestments, right? A certain type in the morning and certain in the afternoon. Halachically, they're all big day lavan. It says they were of a certain value in the morning and a certain value in the afternoon. That was a hakpada that they had in the temple, but it wasn't necessarily something that was demanded by the Torah. V'lokachin shnei esronoth. You take these 2 esronoth of wheat flour. V'lashinotan achad achat. V'ofinotan achad achat. They are kneaded separately and they're baked separately. What could you have done? Just knead them together and then separate them, or like they do with challahs. You get the little challahs, especially. They're basically stuck together almost. They rejoin each other in the baking process. That's definitely what you don't want to do. Lishatan arichatan bachutz, v'afiyatan b'pnim kichla minachot. Like all the other grain offerings, these are kneaded and they're actually arichatan means they're shaped into the loaf outside of the temple. That means outside of the Azara. And they're baked within the Azara. That the baking process is always in the Azara. And also the process of making these does not override Yom Tov. We just said what? The Korban Omer is specifically overrides Yom Tov and also Shabbos. You even reap it on Yom Tov and Shabbos, and you process it and everything. It has to be brought that very day. But these baked loaves are like lechem aponim. Lechem aponim, you put them out on Shabbos, they have to be baked sometime. Like we said, if, let's say, there's going to be 2 days of Yom Tov before Shabbos, you have to bake the lechem aponim well in advance. So too, these breads, they have to be baked in advance of Shavuos. If you're going to have Shabbos before Shavuos, which happens quite often, you have to make sure to bake them well beforehand. It says, Vein Tzarich Lomar Shabbat. And if they don't override Yom Tov, they definitely don't override Shabbos. Ela Ofinotan Me Erev Yom Tov. You have to bake them sometime before Yom Tov. Shneimar, Hu Levado Ye'aseh Lochem. When the Heter Malacha on Yontif is Yehu Levado Ye'aseh Lochem. Ach Asher Ye'aseh L'chol Nefesh. Ochel Nefesh. Lachem V'lo Ligvoa. This dispensation to do Malacha on Yom Tov is for you, what you're going to eat, not for Gavoa, not for God, so to speak. Wait a minute, but we said that even on Yontif, we conduct the entire sacrificial service. We slaughter animals, we burn the entrails, we do all sorts of malachas on Shabbos and Yontif in the temple. Why isn't this considered a temple activity? I don't know. Okay, that's how the sages understood it, that presenting these breads, like the lechem aponim, does not override Shabbos. Apparently because these were eaten entirely by people. They're not considered a korban necessarily. They're eaten by everybody. Lechem aponim. Who ate the lechem aponim? What went to the mizbeach? The frankincense, but that wasn't part of the baking. There was a bazach, ciborium, as they call it. They say they took a picture for Korean to show what they put the bazach looked like. They used basically the Catholics still have these type of things in their places, lahavdil. But that's basically what it is. They had these two ceremonial cups full of frankincense. So that was put on this bath, but that wasn't involved in the baking necessarily. Okay. He Erev Yom Haya Erev Yom Tov Shabbat. Let's say Erev Yom Tov was Shabbos. Like I said, that happens to us also. Ofino Tan Erev Shabbos. So you have to bake these shtei lechem even before Shabbos, 2 days before Shavuos. V'nechaloth b'shlishi lafiatan shehu Yom Tov. And they are then eaten on the third day of their baking. It means they're baked on Friday, and they will be eaten on Sunday. Sunday is day 3 from Friday, including. It says in the Torah that these shtei lechem are chametz. Well, that's a chiddush. Normally, that which is brought into the temple is what? It has to be halachically matzah. Lechem aponim. There's no reason to say that matzah has to be crackers or matzah has to be hard or the matzah has to be flat. Matzah just means unleavened bread. You could bake it thick and large, whatever size. It's still halachically matzah because it's not leavened. But these are specifically leavened. Ketzad says, so how do you leaven it? Mevisa or mimakom acher. You have to bring sourdough from somewhere else because there's no sourdough in the temple. V'notes no l'tocha isaron, and you put it into this isaron of flour. Actually, the same way you leaven any other. Nowadays, is that what we do? We use sourdough for everything. Well, you might, but many people don't like the taste that sourdough does. If you use sourdough yeast to ferment your bread, it's going to come out. It's going to produce a sour taste. You know, that's the thing. Sourdough has a certain taste to it. Most of the breads that we get nowadays, we use baker's yeast. And baker's yeast have a different fermentation, not lactic acid fermentation, but alcoholic fermentation like beer. So it doesn't come out as sour. It actually creates more of a sweet taste in the bread. And give me that kind of fermentation over sourdough any day of the week. You know, but that's what they used to. They didn't have baker's yeast at the time. So most breads that were leavened came out sour. What's the question? In San Francisco, I don't know what. Okay, good. So it's another reason not to live in San Francisco. Yeah, just another. Yeah. Well, and then they pour in the soleth into this isaron measuring thing, and they leaven it with this sourdough. But that's the old days. The baker's yeast is relatively new. That you could all just buy packets in the store and use that. They are square, but it doesn't mean square. Merubaot means rectangular. Okay, just means right angles. Orech kol chala shivat tefachim. Each loaf is 7 tefach long. How long is a tefach? Tefach is about 8 centimeters, so it's 56 centimeters long. Ruchba arba'at tefachim, and its width is 4 tefachim, 32 centimeters. The gova arba esbaot, and the height is 4 etzbaot, and each etzba is 2 centimeters or so. So it's 8 centimeters high. Wait a minute. Arba etzbaot is a tefach. Why don't you just say 1 tefach? Because they measured it with etzbaot in this case. It's more exact. when you're already saying, let's say, 7 tefachs, give or take, maybe an bar too, it's already, a rough in there. They don't have the precision with which we are used to today. I think we have to stop here. We can't go on to the next halacha. You guys say your choice. Okay. And then they have to wave the bread. Who waves the bread? And also they have to bring these 2 lambs as the peace offering. He brings the 2 lambs. And the Kohen who's performing this waves them while they're yet alive. A lot of the tznufa is chazea tznufa, let's say. And once the animal has been slaughtered, so they take the different cuts of the animal and they wave those, pieces of meat. But in this case, it's a whole lamb. So that's a little bit harder, but still, that's what they would do. Shnemar ve'nif otam tznufa. He should wave them as a wave offering. If he did each one separately, he has discharge obligation. What's the implication about these 2 kvasim? That he had to do both at the same time, apparently. He picked them both up. So you needed a big, strong Kohen to do this. Well, it could have been smaller ones. Yeah, maybe in their first year. Don't forget, lamb in its first year could be anywhere from like a month old until almost 12 months old. But apparently, this is how he did it. Anybody here ever pick up a lamb and try to wave it? No. Okay. Next, we're so disconnected from these things. He slaughters them, mafshit. He skins them. He takes the breast and the shok. That's the foreleg from each of them. Umanichan bitzad shtei halechem. He puts them next to the 2 loaves of bread. Umaniach shtei adav mil matan. He puts his hand below them. Umenifa kol kechad b'mizrach b'makom kol tznufot. He goes to the eastern side of the temple. What's the eastern side? That's between basically the gate and the altar. And he, like he does all the other wavings, picks up these 2 loaves and these pieces of the meat. Molichu mevi maleh morid. Molich and mevi is like that, like you're supposed to do with your lulav. And maleh morid is like this. Raise it up. Vim henifan echad echad yatsa. If he did each one individually, he has also discharged his obligation. V'acharkach maktir emureish ne'akvasim. Then they burn the entrails of these 2 lambs. Ushar habasar nechala kohanim. The rest of the meat is eaten by the priests. You say it's a shlamim. Wait a minute. Normally, when I make a shlamim, the kohanim get some to eat, and the rest of us get some to eat. But in this case, no, it's not eaten by Israelites. V'chein shtei achalot, with these 2 breads. Notel kohen gadol achat mehem. Kohen gadol gets one of them. V'ashniya mitchalechet l'chol hamishmarot. And the other bread is divided among all the other Kohanic watches, which is a lot less than lechem apanim. Lechem apanim is eaten by usually all hamishmarot, every single Kohen. Normally lechem apanim is 6 for the Kohen gadol and 6 for those on duty, or those coming into duty and those coming out of duty. But still, it's not every single Kohen. In this case, every single Kohen. Ushtehen ne'achalot kol oto hayom v'chatzi alayla. And both are eaten. It says both challahs can be eaten that very day, and the next night, the ensuing night until chatzot. Why? Kivasar kodshe kodshim. Because it's sort of most holy food. Most of what the Kohanim eat, eaten that very day, plus the next night. And the sages instituted, if you have something to eat at night, then you have to make sure to finish eating it by midnight. That's the harchaka. And the last halacha says, shachat shnei chvasim al arba cholot. Well, he said he's slaughtering 2 kvasim on 4 challahs. Where do they get 4 challahs from? They have extra challahs there. Imamar yikadshu shtai mitoch arba. Will sanctify. We just have extras. They made spares. So 2 out of 4 will get the designation as the korban. Moshech shtai mehem uminifam. So he takes 2 and he waves those. Those are apparently now those are the ones that are sanctified. Vasha'ar, the extra loaves, hodin oto bifnim. They're redeemed within the courtyard, and so it brings them the money. This money tachas, this bread. And then it can be eaten outside the temple like any other non-holy food. Once again, they're redeemed, so they go out to chulin. He didn't make such a stipulation, then the bread has not been sanctified. He has to say the bread will have a brera here. Whichever bread I end up taking, that'll be the one that will be sanctified for this purpose. It shows you that sometimes they did spares. That was a good idea to have in the temple, just like that a lishkata tzlaim. What's a lishkata tzlaim? A room specifically with extra lamps. There are so many lambs brought all the time. Lambs in their first year was the most common korban. This very day, we see how many lambs. There's two of the daily lambs, 14 just because the Torah says so, and another 2 eaten as shlamim. How many lambs is that? That's 18 lambs just this very day. So they always needed a number of lambs on hand in case they find a mum or something else happens. So too, they have spares and spare bread. God willing, we should live to see this, and it's still not too late this year to get ahead with this.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.